Jack Smith is in so much pain and is so wrecked that they've moved him to a different ward of the hospital because he's screaming at night when his painkillers wear off and waking everybody up. He takes himself off painkillers so he can take the oath of office without being under the undue influence of narcotics. The Department of Justice begins, after being embarrassed by what's leaking out about what the House Select Committee is finding. Really, the House Select Committee investigators were like a little U.S. Attorney's Office. Amazing. That happens around late January 2022. Mid-April 2022, the FBI finally agrees to join, and there is a full investigation that begins. But again, Merrick Garland, benefit of the doubt, always leans on the side of being conservative and careful and cautious. Labor Day, he shuts down all the investigations, both the classified documents probe, which we haven't talked about very much, the probe into Donald Trump's absconding with hundreds and hundreds of pages of top secret records, also shuts down the investigation of the election interference on the argument, which is pretty unusual, that Donald Trump, there's a 60-day rule at the Department of Justice. You aren't supposed to take overt investigative steps about a candidate for office 60 days before their election. Garland decides to shut everything down anyway from Labor Day until the election on the argument that Donald Trump is a very important Republican leader, effectively the head of the party, and that it would be inappropriate to continue to investigate him and his campaign. That threw a lot of people for a loop. Like, why are you doing that? That's bending over backwards. So then Jack Smith's appointed a couple days after Donald Trump announces for re-election, November 18th, 2022. And Smith, we describe as kind of a bionic man. He has just broken his leg, fractured it in multiple places. He's in the hospital when Merrick Garland calls him and says, "Would you take the job if I appointed you?" What Merrick Garland doesn't know is that Jack Smith is in so much pain and is so wrecked that they've moved him to a different ward of the hospital because he's screaming at night when his painkillers wear off and waking everybody up. He takes himself off painkillers so he can take the oath of office without being under the undue influence of narcotics. Also, pretty unusual guy. and then begins a sprint to gather evidence with the existing investigative teams, both teams, election interference and classified documents, and tell some of them, look, let's make a decision about whether we're going to indict in 3 months. I have never seen a case brought as quickly as these two cases.
And apparently brought effectively. Yeah, they didn't go through.
Yeah, unlike...
what role did the Chief Justice of the United States play in preventing that from ever happening?
The Chief Justice alone, I don't think we can put it all on the Chief Justice, but two things happened, and I think they're really telling. In January of 2023, if I'm remembering my timeline correctly, there are two fairly enormous cases coming down the pike. Jack Smith asks the Supreme Court in a formal pleading for an expedited hearing on immunity claims that Donald Trump will make about him being immune as a president to take certain actions, immune from criminal prosecution. Jack Smith knows this is going to go to the Supreme Court. Let's get it, sort of settled as soon as we can. The other case that comes down the pike is in Colorado, where Donald Trump is fighting to stay on the ballot because in Colorado, the state has a rule that you cannot be on the ballot for the presidency if you have been charged with insurrection, if you've been involved in an insurrection. And they conclude at the state that Donald Trump meets this definition, and they're questioning whether he can be on the ballot. The Supreme Court decides to give expedited hearing to the Colorado case and rules in Donald Trump's favor. They refuse to give expedited hearing to Jack Smith. It's a critical moment. And the trial judge who is planning to conduct and preside over the trial of Donald Trump for election interference and trying to, use the tools of his office to illegally stay in power. She and her chief judge, when they see that decision by the Supreme Court, just that little decision, no expedited hearing, they stop planning for a trial. They know there won't be enough time.
You report that the Chief Justice did send a note to other justices on the court having to do with this.
I did. And he made the argument that this was an incredibly important decision and that they had to wrestle with it. He also set the time frame so that it would take a long time before they reached their decision. It was not until July that at the end of their proceedings, the end of that session, that they agreed to hear the case and make a ruling.
Next week, the New Yorker staff writer Susan Glasser will be here in conversation with Madeline Brand. Collapsing norms. Can American democracy survive this stress test? That's the subject. Everybody have a good night, and thanks for being with us.